So let's go ahead and open up Nomad Sculpt. Okay, so you'll see your default sphere here. You should have a grid. You'll see the red line going across and the green line going down. And if you don't see the grid down here, there's a grid there. And also, if you still don't see it, just in case you're in perspective, then you might not see it. So I'm going to hit front here. This is a snap cube, so we can kind of look around our scene. I'm going to hit front and just make sure that I'm in orthographic. So you want to use this little camera in orthographic. That just means that we're not seeing all the perspective, which can kind of be confusing at first. All right, so we have obviously a panel here, a panel here. These are all our tools. Sometimes you'll see me look at the tools like this. Sometimes they're like this. Now my colors might be a little different than yours, and that's because you can customize Nomad, you can customize these, and you can customize the color. And if you want yours to be a nice purple like mine, just tap on this little photo and then tap this color, and then you can move this around and you can change your colors. So right now, all we have on our 3D scene, the only 3D mesh we have is this default sphere. It's 98.3 thousand vertices, which means those are the polygons that make up this sphere. So that's actually quite big. So what I usually like to do is go here. So this is going to be our scene menu. And right now we only have a sphere. So let's see when we take add and we add a new sphere. So now we have a new sphere, but we don't see the old ones because they're kind of on top of each other. So as a controller, let's use the gizmo. So you'll notice that there's this little thing up here that says validate, and you have a little bit of options here, and kind of hidden right here. See this little tool? So this is our gizmo. And you can see the gizmo here. Yours might be in a different place, but this is the gizmo. So just think of the gizmo as a controller. I'm going to hit front again, so I know I'm looking at the front of our sphere. So validate, that just means you're officially bringing it into the scene so you can use all of the available tools. Before you validate, there's just some things you can do kind of before it goes officially into the scene. So there's a few things you can do. I'm not going to go into this. It can be a little confusing at first, but there's a few things you can do, and then you kind of, what's the right word? Not solidify. And then once you're happy with these things that you can do at first, you lock it in, and then you validate, and now it's part of the scene. Now you can use all the other tools. So anytime you add a mesh, just remember that anything you add, there's going to be some tools here, and you can hit validate. And that will just make it the regular shape that it is. To undo, I'm going to take 2 fingers and just tap, and you'll see that I can just go back. To go forward, you just use 3 fingers. Okay, so now we're back to our scene with 2 spheres. 98.3K is very high for a sphere. 6,146 is much lower than that. But again, we can't see them. So remember, any mesh that you tap on is going purple. So they're kind of in the same spot. You can see that the first one is a little bit smaller because every time I tap it, you can see it. So let's go to sphere. We'll use our gizmo and see these arrows. So this one, obviously up and down. This one left and right. But of course it's 3D, so if you're looking at front, you don't see the blue, but when you turn it, that's back and forth towards you. So I'll hit undo, I'll hit front, and I'll just move this up so now we can see both spheres. See this big orange ring? So this controls the size. So let's try to match it up. I'll move it down a bit. So there's some other things on the gizmo. It can be a little confusing, but for now we'll just try to stick to these arrows. The bigger ring outside, which is the size. And then also, see these little round dots that the arrows are pointing to? That just stretches. Okay, so we'll hit undo. So these long arrows move things. These little nodes, they stretch. And then also you have these rings. See, we have the red ring, the blue ring, and the green ring. So this just rotates. So if it's like this, and then we take the blue ring and we can rotate. And you notice that it's rotating 90 degrees. So it's not rotating freely. If we wanted to rotate freely, then you have to take it off of snap. So if you take it off of snap, you can rotate freely. And also you can change this number, let's say 45 degrees instead of 90. So then you have a little more control. Okay, I'm going to undo back to the regular sphere. And I'm going to turn snap off. Okay, so now we have our two spheres. Let's go ahead and delete this bigger one. So we'll go to our scene menu. That's where we control our meshes. We're on the 98.3K. We'll tap these three dots and delete. Okay, so another thing that I always use is this red line. That'll be our floor. So let's just add a 3D object that we can make into a floor. So we'll tap our scene again. We'll add. And let's use a cylinder. So now we have our cylinder. Remember, we haven't validated it yet because there's a few things we can do. Like if we want to, you can play around with this. You can sort of make it, you can adjust all these things. So there's some fun things you can do. Let's go to the gizmo. And let's shrink it. Let's hit front. And we want to move it up until the bottom edge is aligned with this red line. Okay, just like that. Perfect. So remember, we can go over to this little option here. We haven't validated it yet. These are just other tools, and I'll just show you something else you can do. You can tap hole. See, now there's a hole in the middle. So as you can see, there's lots of options that you can do before you bring it into the project. Let's tap hole twice so that it goes away. I think I want to make this a little wider. There's one thing that I want to mention. If yours isn't exactly matching mine, so if yours doesn't look as smooth as mine does, it might be smooth shading. So let's tap this sphere. And let's tap this little sphere up here. You see our materials. Just go down to smooth shading. So right now mine's on auto, and my auto is on. Your auto might be off. If you want to change yours, just go here to this little cog, and you can tap smooth shading. If I tap it again, auto becomes on. I like to work in smooth shading. I just think it looks better. Okay, so before we validate this, let's play around with the edges. Let's make them a little rounder. So we'll tap these three dots. And you don't have to really understand why I'm doing these things because it's very complicated. But I'm going to put post subdivision up to 2. And that's essentially just, as you can see the wireframe, I'll just tap on the wireframe so you can sort of see what I'm doing under the hood. So this is just with no subdivision. With 1, you see, it sort of made each one of those blocks 4. And if I do it again, it'll make each one of those 4 into another 4, and so on and so forth. So essentially, it's just changing the resolution. It's changing the geometry of the shape and making it more dense. And when it's more dense, you can add more detail. But I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Okay, so in order to make the ends rounder, let's put some subdivisions. So we'll put it to 2. And you can see it's more dense. And let's change this division X So let's just scroll down and you'll see that it's a lot softer. So let's do something like that. I might actually raise this a little bit so that it looks a bit smoother. So post subdivision 3, division X, 18. So now we can validate. Once we validate, we can't do any of those options that we did before. So when I'm sculpting, I like to switch from white to a matte cap. A matte cap is just like a fake lighting setup that just makes the sculpts in the clay easier to see. I like to call it clay.
His mama named him Clay. I'm gonna call him Clay.
We'll just tap here, this little sun, and switch from lit PBR to matte cap. You can tap here, and then you can choose different matte caps. Lately I've been using one of these. I think I'll use this one. Naki Clay Red Gloss. We can turn off the grid. So just tap here. Okay, so now let's import our reference image. So make sure you have the image on your device. So let's go here to this little picture tab. Reference image. Tap on the image. Import. Photos. And then find your image here. So we're going to start with him. Add. Okay, so now you see the image down here. You can adjust the placement of it and the size. You just go back here to this picture, transform, and you can resize it like so. I'll have a link for this image down below. Okay, so let's start to build our little character. So right off the bat, I see sort of a soft rectangular shape, 2 round shapes, some more rectangles, and then we can probably use tubes for the arms and the legs. So let's take this sphere, let's go to our scene, and let's rename it Eye. We can use it later for the eyes. So we just tap these 3 dots here, name, Eye. Okay, so now we have our cylinder, which is our floor, so let's rename it. I'll just put FLR. We can also hide the eye since we don't need it now. Let's start with the body. So let's just tap this little eye. Okay, so let's add a box. So remember how we made this nice and soft? So we can do the same thing to the box. So let's tap this little hidden icon here, the gizmo. And also, if you forget, you can always go here and tap the gizmo as well. Or maybe you can't. It doesn't work. So yeah, tap here. Okay, so we'll just move this box up. And if we tap front, it's more rectangular. So we'll just take this round node here and make it rectangular. That looks good. And then we turn to one side. You can see on the snap cube, now we're looking at the left side. And he looks like he would be fairly thin to me. So this will be like his width. I think something like that is good. So now we want to soften these edges. So remember, we haven't validated. So we can't use all the tools, but we can adjust the outer layer. So we'll tap these 3 dots, post subdivision 2, and let's slide this down until it's our desired width or softness. I think we'll do 6. I think that looks pretty good. So now that I'm happy with that, make him a little thinner. We'll hit validate. And make sure to save often. Nomad will close on you and you will be annoyed. So make sure that you save often. Okay, so our shape looks pretty good, but you can see that it's not exactly straight. In the reference, it's a little more rounded. So we can use the smooth tool. So if you tap the smooth tool and then you tap the mesh, you'll see that there's 2 dots. And this is because we have symmetry on. So whatever's happening on one side is happening on the other side. So right now the symmetry is going straight down the middle of the frame. If you tap here, this is the symmetry options, and you'll see the plane X. So you'll see the red X, and now you can see this red line. So let's tap show line. So now that line will remain on even when you're not in the settings window. Now symmetry can get very confusing, so I'll just say this about it. So right now the red X is going straight down the middle of the project. Let's just assume the project is the world. The world is everything that's happening here. So we have the left side and the right side. Now you don't have to do this, but if I was to move this over, you notice that the center of the world hasn't changed. The symmetry is changed on this because it's now not in the center anymore. So if you're ever trying to do something and you want to maintain the symmetry wherever your object is, just go back here, method, and change from world to local. Local just means it's local to whatever that mesh is. So now we're using the local center and the local X. So I'm going to undo. That's a quick tutorial on symmetry with world versus local. Okay, so now we're back in the center. We're back using world, and we're going to use the smooth tool. So again, symmetry's on. And when we smooth, let's smooth this right here. So you can see that it's smoothing this, but you notice the problem. So it's only smoothing the front, left, and right sides. So to fix that, let's undo. We also want the front and the back. So you just go to symmetry. Right now we have X. So let's see what the Y does. See, Y is down there. Let's go ahead and hit local so we can see where it is on our local piece. Okay, so Y goes across the middle. So that means it's now the top and the bottom. If we go back here, we turn this off. We go to the blue, the Z. So now you see the Z here. So this means left and right, and front and back. So we have our blue line and our red line, and we're using local. So now with smooth, you can see that you don't have to press too hard with the smooth tool. Let's make it a little bit bigger over here. So we can just kind of smooth this out, and then you'll notice that the shape is changing slightly. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's use the move tool. Let's make it a little smaller. And maybe we just want to hike up this middle part just so it's a little more round. So we'll just use move and we'll just kind of push that up a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. Let's take smooth again and just give the bottom a little smooth as well. Perfect. And what I like to do is just take these parts and just put them back to their default state. So I'm just going to turn Z off. And for the method, I'm just going to go back to world. So it's just the way that it was. So let's add another box for the eyebrows. We go to scene, add, box. So we'll tap our gizmo and we'll move it up. And we can go ahead and shrink it using this big orange ring, and we'll move it up again. So as you can see, it's just pretty narrow. We can go ahead and rotate it. So we'll take snap. I'll just put this to 90. So we're using snap 90 and this blue ring so we can rotate it this way. So we look at the top view, we need to make it thinner. Maybe a little more flat. So now we'll go to our 3 dots, post subdivision 2, and then just drag down the topology until it's about what we want. I think 3 is pretty good. And we'll do 2, smaller file size. So we'll validate. Let's bring it down and move it up. And now we're going to make this a mirror. So what that is, when you add a mirror modifier, it modifies the shape so that it's a mirror. So you have one side and then you'll have the other side. It's still one piece, but it's going to be mirrored. So we'll go here. We have our box. Let's go ahead and rename it first. So we'll just put browse. So now we have our browse. Let's add a mirror modifier. Add. So here's our primitives, and we'll just go down to these red repeaters, and we'll add a mirror. So then when you look here, you see this mirror, and you see the brow is a child of the mirror, so it's connected to it. So make sure you tap on the brow, and then you can move this arrow over, and you'll see that there's 2 of them. So let's just pretend we have one. Even though we have a mirror, let's just work on this one. So we just want to place it where it would go. We'll shrink it. We'll move it up, over a little bit more. So there's a little bit of space in between. There's a little bit of space in between, maybe a tad bit longer. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now let's move it towards us because it's sort of on the front part of his little head. So we'll move it up, and then we're going to use that green ring to rotate it a little bit. But remember, we have it on 90, so let's go ahead and tap snap so that we can just move it freely. Okay, let's move it down. And here's another quick trick. Let's say you just want to move it straight up and down. You can hit align. So if you hit align, the gizmo is going to align to the project, to the world. So up will always be up. Left and right will always be left and right. So it's not beholden to the shape. So this is the orientation for the shape. This is the orientation for the world. So now you can move it straight up and down. We're going to turn that off, and we'll just go ahead and I'm going to flatten it a little bit and then rotate it a little bit more and push it back, maybe up a little bit. And last but not least, let's rotate with this blue ring like this. Move it out a little bit more. So you can play around with that until you get it exactly how you like it. But I think that looks pretty good. So now we'll go ahead and, if we like these, if you're sure you like them, if you want to solidify them as the eyebrows, I'm going to make mine a little bit taller. Go to your scene, tap on the mirror, and hit validate. And now, unfortunately, we have to rename this browse. But if you're not sure, you can always just leave them. You can always just rename the mirror browse, and then you can just leave it. So then you can come back later and putz around with it. So remember, we have the eye. Let's go ahead and unhide the eye. So we'll move it up, large orange ring to scale. We'll tilt it and pull it out. Okay, so that looks like a decent size, but of course we need to add another mirror. So we go to our scene, add mirror. Now remember to go to the eye. You don't want to be on the whole mirror, because if you're on the whole mirror, whoops, it'll just move everything. You want to make sure you're on the eye, or you can tap it as well. But you want to make sure you're on the eye, and you separate them. So we'll move it down. Looks like they're a little smaller. A little further apart, maybe a little bigger. So that looks pretty good. I think that looks perfect. And you can inset them, however much you want. And also, they look like they could be a little bit flatter, so I'm going to take this blue and just kind of flatten them a little bit. Yeah, maybe something like that. So now let's add the pupils. So by doing this, we'll go to the scene, and let's take the mirror in the eye, clone it. Whoops. So we'll clone that. And let's change the name, pupil. We can change this mirror to eye. Okay, so now we have pupil. Look at it and turn it to its side. So we'll pull that out, even though it's a copy, and we'll shrink it. Don't think anything funny. So I'm going to push these in now. So we have something like this. And of course, again, you can choose to make them a little bit flatter, and then you just want to rotate them so that they're fairly even on the surface of the eye. I think that looks pretty good. And maybe a little bit smaller, actually. So let's use tubes for the arms and the legs. So just find tube, tap path, so the arm starts about here. So we'll place the Apple Pencil down, drag to the end point, and then let go. And then we tap this little green dot, and now we pretty much have our tube. So of course there's a bend in it. So once you have these two nodes and you have your tube, then you can add more to that by just tapping and adding a new node. So now we just need to manipulate this tube to get it exactly how we want it. So I'll take the end and sort of stretch it up a little bit more. We'll drag this down a bit, maybe out a little bit more, and then we'll bring this in. So as I'm looking at him, there's a little more space here and a little more space here. So what that tells me, whoops, is that I probably need to make him a little bit taller. So we can just tap on that mesh and just stretch him out a little bit. And I'll move him down. So now I have this. I just want to move it straight down. So I'm going to go for that hidden gizmo. And remember, right now it's sort of, the gizmo's all over the place because of the arm. But remember, we can hit a line and then we can move it straight down. So that looks a little bit better. So I'm going to use my imagination and actually tilt it a little bit like this. I'm going to move it in the middle. Okay, so now let's tap this little squiggly to go back to the nodes. So this bottom one, I'm actually going to pull this out so it's not inside the body. I want it to be around here. Oh, and there's also another little quick tip. If you want this to be like a sharp elbow, just tap the node. But I don't. I'll make it a little bit round. If I want to add a little more detail to it, I can add a second node there. So you see we have radius. So we only have one orange node. This is scale. So if we tap that once, now we can scale this big and this small, or vice versa. You tap again, and then you can move each one individually. So you can see the arm is quite thin here. But I'll take this node and I'll open it up so it's a little bit wider. So then we have a close shape to that. You can do the same thing here. Maybe this is a little bit shorter. I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that looks nice. So let's go ahead and go back to the tube tool, back to path, and let's make more tubes for the legs. So we'll just drag down. There we go. Now, as you can see, it's within the same, so when I made these, they're within the same mirror as the pupil. So that can happen sometimes, because if you just make a new mesh, it'll automatically go in a mirror. So all you have to do is just long press, and you can just bring them out. And you can see we brought them out of the mirror, so now they are separate. But that's okay. We can just add a mirror. And then we can take this one and just drag it right in there. Okay, so I'm going to rename all this arms and legs. And we'll just name these individually just to make it, to keep it together. So this is arms, and this is legs. Okay, so now obviously we need to adjust this leg, so we'll turn it on its side. We'll take this bottom one and bring it up and just get rid of it. So that's an easy way to get rid of them. You just drag them into each other. Okay, so now we'll just move these down and straight. And again, we already have all three of them, which is perfect. So now we can make this a little bit bigger, but see how we want this to be more like a funnel. So I'll add another node here, and you can make that thinner. Okay, so now as I'm looking at the gizmo, let's tap the gizmo, and it looks like they're closer to the outside of the body, and they're a little more squat, so I'm just going to squish them. Okay, I think that looks good. And don't forget, you can also kind of squish them and adjust them like that as well. So I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to straighten them out a little bit. Okay, something like that looks good. And let's add some little feet to him. So I like the way that these legs are. I'm going to validate. I'm going to go to the arm, and I'm also going to validate. And then, so we have arms and legs. I'm going to add a sphere. And we'll use this for his feet. So we're going to go ahead and validate. So the sphere is right here. Let's go ahead and rename that feet. It's already within this mirror. So remember, if we shrink it and move it up and separate it, it's already going to be mirrored. So let's just make some really simple, kind of small, round feet. So I just shrink it, I'll flatten it a little bit, and then I'll move it forward. Notice how much I'm moving it forward. Maybe I'll make them a little smaller. I want to take drag. So now I want to, let's make it a little bit bigger here in the radius. And I want to drag it back to the foot. Maybe I'll make drag a little bit smaller. And then we can just kind of drag it until it makes sense. So just make sure to look at every angle. See here, I'm going to just move it over. Maybe I'll squeeze it together like this. The gizmo can be a little confusing at first, but you'll get it if you work at it. So that looks pretty good. You can adjust the shape a little bit with the drag tool. So we're just kind of pushing and pulling, and make it a little bit smaller if you want it to be a little bit more detailed, or a little bit finer movement. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to take move and try to swivel the ends out a little bit. Move is more like sweeping movements. Drag is for more like details. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And you can also use drag and move. Let's turn symmetry on so you can see the two dots. You can use them for the legs as well. Let's go and make sure we save. So this is a little bit extra credit, but I want to add some quick and easy hands. So it looks like he has his hands on his hip. So we'll move him down. Let's add a sphere. Let's go ahead and take the sphere and just drag it out of the mirror. That way it doesn't get lost. So we'll tap the gizmo and move it up. Make it smaller. So now let's add a torus right here. So let's tap the gizmo and move that up right underneath the sphere, and we'll shrink it. So tap on the little torus options. Let's make it a little bit more thick, and then tap the gizmo again and we can shrink it. So maybe something like that is pretty good. So now let's tap on the sphere, turn it to the side, and we'll use this blue node to kind of squeeze it together. I think that's pretty good. We'll tap the gizmo and do the same. Maybe we'll make it a tad bit smaller. Maybe this needs to be smaller as well. Okay, so something like this. Okay. So now we want to tap on the sphere, and we want to use, let's go ahead and validate it, and let's use clay. So we'll tap front. Let's put clay around 60, let's see, maybe around 65. So now we're just going to add clay just like this. Okay, so you want something like that. And then let's add one in the middle. Okay, just like this. Round these out a little bit more. So you can kind of see what I'm getting at. Okay, so as long as you have a shape similar to this, you're in good shape. So now let's add another sphere. We'll use gizmo and drag it up. We'll shrink it. Okay, we'll move it right about there. We're just going to shrink it a little bit more. Stretch it out. Shrink it a bit more. Maybe flatten it a little bit like this with this node. So essentially we just want to make it sort of like a nice round thumb, and we'll move it into our shape. So right about there, you can almost see it. So let's go ahead and validate this thumb, and then we'll use, let's try move first. Let's put move around 150 or so. So we just want to move the back. We want to move the back into our little fist. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So just push it into the fist. Okay, something like this. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll take drag and try to make it a little bit more round. So we'll make it a little bit bigger. We want to try to keep that roundness if you can. It can be a little tricky, but just do the best you can. We'll drag this bottom part down a little bit. Okay, it looks pretty good. So now we're going to voxel remesh these together. So that's going to give us the fist. It's going to voxel remesh, takes both meshes and creates one new mesh. So we'll tap our scene. We want to tap the sphere for the fist and the sphere for the thumb. So just make sure both of those are checked, and that's it. And then we want to go to voxel. So we'll go here to this little pyramid, voxel, and let's go to 150. So we just drag the slider up to 150 on the resolution, and then remesh. Okay. So now we'll take smooth and just smooth it all together. Okay, so now it looks like he has a little tiny fist. Quick and dirty little fist. If you want to get crazy, you can use crease, and you can try to get back some of these details. Just make sure you turn symmetry off, because the object is not really symmetrical anymore. So you can do things like this if you want to experiment with some more details, and then just take smooth and maybe lightly smooth it out. Maybe add some details like this. And then smooth. Okay, great. So we have our little fist. So we'll go to our scene. So let's take this torus and let's go ahead and long press, and we'll nestle it underneath the sphere. And let's name our sphere fist. Perfect. We'll bring it down the hip too, just so you guys can see what I do. I think that looks good. I'm going to take drag and just kind of adjust his little knuckles here. Smooth it out a little bit. So I'm going to take the arm, and I'm going to rotate it out a little bit more. And then I'll just take move and just sort of move it so it's a nice fit. Perfect. Okay. So of course we need to bring this fist over to this side. So we'll go to our scene. We'll select our fist. Add a mirror. Perfect. And of course, remember, you can validate these, but if you're not sure, you can just leave them and you can do that later. So next he has a little heart here. So you could paint that on, but let's do it with shapes. So we'll go to our scene, we'll add a cylinder. Let's take it out of this mirror. So we need to use our gizmo. We'll move it up, out, we'll shrink it. Now let's fold it forward towards us. It doesn't need to be on a line, but let's hit snap and use this red ring. So now it's facing us. We'll flatten it out, move it back. So we'll kind of put it right up against the skin. So around here. So let's shrink it. Okay, so now let's take our little cylinder here and make it a heart. So we'll use drag, tap on it, you can see the line going down the middle. And let's just kind of drag it down. You might have to make it a little bit bigger. We'll just drag it down, give it a little bit of a point. So something like this. Okay, so now we just need to make a mirror for it. So we'll do add, mirror, and then make sure you go down to the cylinder. Let's go ahead and label this heart button. You can just name it heart. Make sure you go to the cylinder, gizmo. So let's move them over, and then we'll rotate with this green ring. We can rotate them together. And of course you can move them. You can kind of shape your heart however you'd like it. You just have to maneuver these shapes. I think I like that. Okay, so I'm going to take this and validate it. But I want them to be smoother and more together. So let's take voxel. Here I'm using a shortcut for the voxel remesher. It's the same thing as if I go here, voxel, and remesh. It's exactly the same thing. So let's go 150 and hit OK. And then remesh. We can take smooth, and we can just smooth our little heart. Perfect. So now you can adjust the size. So you notice when you hit the gizmo's down here. If that ever happens and it's not exactly on the shape, hit pivot, center, pivot. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I want to squeeze it together a little bit, maybe a little bit smaller, and I'll move it up a little bit. But I think that's good. All right, let's save. Oh, I forgot to mention, I curled his feet up with the drag tool just for fun. Okay, so before we do the mouth with the crease tool, we need to up the resolution. So if we look at the wireframe, these squares are pretty big, so it's not really that dense. It's going to be hard to get detail. So if you use crease, you can see not much detail. So let's voxel remesh this, but also let's add the legs and the feet and stuff so it's all one piece. Turn the wireframe off. So first let's save. Okay, so now once we do this, we can save it as something new. We can even save it as something new now. So just hit save as, new, and we'll name this one second. So now we have the other one saved. You don't have to worry about going back if you need to. So let's go to the arms. We're in our scene menu. Let's choose the arms and hit validate. The arms and legs. Okay, let's see. So we have this box, which is the body. And then we have the arms and legs. And we want to voxel remesh them together. Ooh, also something really small. Before I do that, I'm going to trim the feet. So I'm going to use the trim tool with the rectangle. And let's try out X-ray. Let's put on our X-ray glasses. You can see, because remember, this was just a sphere. So let's just trim it. So if you use the square, it just makes a white square, and whatever's in the white gets zapped. So now it's a little bit, it's flatter. And you want to do it right underneath this surface. You don't want to go right at the edge. You want to do it right underneath the surface, because this is going to be a little craggy. Okay, so we can turn our X-ray glasses off. Arms and legs, box. We'll voxel remesh them together. Voxel, let's do it at 200. Let's do it at 250. 250 and remesh. Okay, perfect. So now you see that these are all one shape. We can use smooth, make sure you have symmetry on, and we can smooth out all of these sections, all these areas. You can hit solo, so that will just solo whatever you have selected. And just be gentle with the smooth tool. You don't want to lose any of the detail and shapes and stuff that we made. Perfect. Okay, so we'll hit solo. Looks great. Everything's connected. So now when we use crease, move it down, you'll see a lot more detail. So let's turn off symmetry. And here's another quick tip. Let's tap this little button here, the layers, and add a layer. And let's press this little pencil and name it crease. Okay, so now let's sort of match his little smirk. Okay, it looks good. Sometimes I'll take clay and I'll add a little clay right over it. And I'll make it a little bit smaller, and I'll add some here as well. And then you can take crease and you can go behind it like this. And then take smooth and just give it a nice smooth finish. Let's make that a little smaller. So you can smooth this all out so it looks a little bit more natural. And then just redo your crease. So we can do something like that. Okay, it looks pretty good. Okay, great job so far. So let's go ahead and save. And let's give him a really quick, easy lighting setup. So let's switch from matte cap to lit PBR. So it's going to go back to being white. So we'll tap the sun. We'll switch from matte cap to lit PBR. And let's turn off the environment. And this is my individual environment. Yours might look a little bit different. But this is the one, I'll have a link to this in the description if you want my environment that I use for everything. It's called Eye Glare Environment. Okay, so let's change everything to a neutral tone. So let's go to our scene and let's select everything. And then we'll tap this little sphere with a line through it. We'll tap that. And then we want to do sort of a brownish or any sort of neutral color. I usually do something like this, something like a terracotta. I already have my color saved, so I'm just going to select it. The color I have saved is D1742C. Okay, so once you have that there, just hit Paint All. So now it's just a more neutral color. It'll be easier to light. Okay, so let's make sure our environment is off. Everything should be black. And then we'll add our first light. So we add our first light here. Let's tap the little pencil and name it Key. Okay, so you should see the lighting set up here. Let's tap this and put 2. There we go. And let's tap the little icon and hit the gizmo. And if you don't see the icons, you can check here and if you don't see them. So we just want to move this out of the way. So let's hit Align and we'll just move it left and up. So this is a sun light, so it doesn't really matter where the light is. All that matters is how it's angled. So I'm going to hit Undo because I like that just the way it is. Okay, so we have one light. Let's tap this little icon here to clone it. And we'll name this one, whoops, let's name this one Rim. So now we'll use our gizmo and move that over to the other side. We'll move it down here. So now let's use the green ring and let's turn it. See this white arrow? That's where the light is pointing. So we'll turn it. Let's use the blue. So we want to put a rim of light on his left side, the shadow side. So just like that. But let's make it brighter, so let's turn this to 5. You can slide this as well, but I'll put it to 5. It's a little bit on the floor, so I'm going to try to, okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so that's 2 lights. Oh, you can also, let's make this a little warmer by pressing here. We'll make that a little bit warmer. So let's go back to our lights. So let's clone this. I like to rename this R2. Okay, so let's move it over to the other side. And let's rotate it until it's hitting the other side of him. But not so much a rim, a little bit more, like something like that. Let's switch this color to blue. I guess we could kind of match his light if we want. Yeah, let's make it yellow like the reference. Make it a little more white. So I'll try to match the reference a little bit better. So I think that's pretty good. So now we have another light if you want to add. Maybe we'll make it a spotlight, so we'll tap the sun and make it a spotlight. And we'll move it up. And this one, you'll see the cone. And wherever that cone is, that's where the light is going to hit. So sometimes I just like to make sure the face is nice and lit. I think that's pretty good. So now let's turn on post-process. So that will show us what we've done with all the processing and calculations. Okay, so we'll go here and we see the quality. I'm going to turn mine up. You don't have to turn yours all the way up. I'm going to turn mine up and I'm going to hit post-process. And you can take a look if you want to match mine. I like to put global illumination all the way up. These are up a little high. So I'll put those down. I think that's about it. I do have tone mapping. You can play around with that if you want. It's a little dark. I'll turn mine off. but I think that's about it. And I want to go back and turn the environment back on, so that'll lighten it up a bit too. I have mine at 2.6. So you can adjust that as you need. I might make mine a little bit lower. And I might take my first light, my key light, and I might make that a little bit higher. Okay. Okay, great job with the lights. Let's save. So that's a nice, easy setup. So now we just need to color him. So let's make this like that beige color. So we just tap it, tap this color, and then you can make it any color that you like. You can adjust the roughness so it's not so glossy. So we'll paint all. We'll take the body. He's more of a yellow color. So you just need to move this around a little bit, and you can move this if that makes it easier. Okay, so let's find our yellow. I think it's something like that. Just so it's a little glossy. There's a little bit of shine on him. So we'll paint it there. Okay, so the eyes are going to be white. We can make those nice and glossy. And then the pupils are going to be black. Make those glossy. The brows are going to be just like a grayish. They look like they should be rough. And the heart is sort of like a muted, like desaturated reddish color. So maybe something like that. So we'll paint that. Okay, so his little fists, I think I just want to make them white. Or is that weird? Is that weird to make them white? Let's try this. Let's tap the little paint thing. Let's tap this little eyedropper and grab the color of his skin. And now let's make it a little bit lighter. Sometimes a little bit lighter, or I think I might like a little bit darker. A little bit darker seems a little bit more natural, so I'm going to paint that. And the torus. Okay, that looks a little bit more natural. Okay, so great job so far. So there's one last thing that we need to do, I think. You notice how this is darker here than ours? So let's use one of the special weapons of Nomad. So let's go ahead and go back to the body. Let's use crease. Now let's tap here and use DIN Topo for dynamic topology. So this is something that takes a resolution. So the resolution might not be that high. The body is kind of high, but it's not that high. But if you enable dynamic topology, it will make the resolution higher. So I usually use radius and speed, and I have this at 50%. I think everything else should be default, but you can take a look and pause if you need. Okay, so we're going to use crease. Symmetry is off. So let's grab our little eyedropper again. We'll grab that color and let's make it darker. And we'll make it rough. We don't want any gloss. So make sure your crease tool is fairly small. So now we can really go in close. And if you notice, we have stroke painting. So if you notice, there's no line through it right now. So if anything I do, it's going to have that dark line. And that's exactly what we need. Okay, so now we're just going to go back over our mouth. You can see I kind of messed up. Ooh, and actually let's turn off post-process while we're doing this. That will help us tremendously. Okay, better. Oh, nope. Nope. Okay, so that's pretty good. If you're having trouble trying to get a smooth line, then make sure you go to crease here and make sure you go to the little pencil, and you can play with the lazy rope stabilizer. So if I turn this up, it'll sort of help me get a straight line. So I turned it up to like 20 or something, and see how it kind of drags behind. It sort of helps you get a nice straight line. I still missed everything. Okay, so that was better. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we'll go back to post-process. It looks great. Let's save. I'm going to save it as. And let's export. So we'll go here. Go down to render. And you can have screen. If you don't want any of this stuff, you can do transparent background if you don't want the purple. If you just leave it, it's going to just do this and the purple. So let's say we do screen. We export. Okay, and we should have unchecked this, but then you have your export, and then you can just share it to wherever you want. I guess I should show you how to turn this off. We just go here, turn that off, boom, so then you can save it like that. Or if you want to be fancy, you can press this little Nomad, go to 000, and do a little turntable. All right, hopefully this crash course was helpful. Hopefully you learned a lot and had fun. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to go more in depth, then definitely check out my Skillshare classes where I am a top teacher. I have about 50 classes, both Procreate and Nomad Sculpt. I also have a few classes on Udemy, so if you want to learn more, or you just like my style, you like the way I teach, you want to support me, those are some other places that you can do it. Thanks again, keep drawing, keep sculpting. I'll see you all in the next video.